Cami Patton, a casting director for As We See It, which follows three young adults who are on the spectrum. I know Jason Katims, who adapted the show based on the Israeli series, wanted it to be neurodiverse in front of and behind the camera. And he's said that he immediately called you after he got the green light for the pilot. So what was that conversation like?
Well, pretty amazing. I mean, we have a few things in common in our personal lives, and so he knew it was something that would be near and dear to me. And the idea that he had already gotten the studio to okay us really just focusing in the beginning on looking for neurodiverse talent was huge. So we had 4 weeks and just really blanketed everything we could, and it was probably my favorite job I've had in my entire career. Not probably, it was overwhelmingly gratifying from day one.
Mm-hmm. So what was that casting process like? 4 weeks? That sounds pretty fast, but I don't know how, if that's just like normal for
normally you'll have 10 weeks to cast a pilot, and it usually the major roles sort of start to be evident in the first few weeks. You kind of get to that pretty quickly of who, and then there may be surprises along the way, but in this process we were just concentrating on the three leads, and it was slightly different because normally you would reach out, put out a breakdown, all the agents would start pitching. Very few agents had actors that were going to be right for us here. They may have had clients who had children that might be right, adult children, whatever. But we also put it out on Actors Access so people could directly submit. We did a lot of research looking into theaters all over the country and Canada and even in the UK, and audition, because my son is part of a theater. And so it just had us thinking, okay, there's going to be a web of theaters out there that have talent that's untapped. And what was, I think, the most different about this process is that each theater we would reach out to would tell us about 2 or 3 more. Like, have you tried this place? Have you talked to these people? And would give us the contact information. And it was really just the most incredibly collaborative and supportive group of people, excited to even just be considered, to have their team members, considered. So it just snowballed, and when we really were just hopeful that we would have a few very good candidates, we tested 10 actors for the 3 leads. We flew them in from Canada, we flew them from upstate New York, Pennsylvania, just all over, and had this big mix and match day of incredible people. So it was it was eye-opening, really. And
it sounds
fantastic.
Amazing, because you are searching for talent, obviously living on the spectrum, and it's an underseen and underserved group of actors, and people represented like in media, and also especially as young adult characters, because I think oftentimes when you see characters who are autistic, it's usually young children, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're also not the lead of a TV show or a movie. So what did it mean to be able to discover all these amazing actors on the spectrum, like you were saying?
Part of what was interesting about it is that these are people who, many of whom have never been encouraged to try to follow this, and yet for a lot of people who are on the spectrum, it is a great, it's a really good, what do I want to say, tool for them in terms of going to class, being on stage, trying to be outside of themselves. And so they are there, they do have experience, but they've not been encouraged to actually follow it professionally in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things that I appreciate the most about this project is it is showing people with talent, go for it. There is a way forward. And we were able to use some of the people that we tested and some of the people that we found along that audition process in other roles both neurodiverse and neurotypical on the show. And that as well was like, it wasn't like, okay, now we've checked those boxes, we've got our leads, let's go. Jason was so really committed from the get-go to doing this in the most inclusive way. And we were kind of allowed the freedom to do that. And if we had to fly someone in or bring someone from out of town and put them up in a hotel, even to be an extra, there was no question asked. It was just done. And it was the first time I've been as involved in hiring even the background actors, because every extra that you see in an environment like in the drama class, and everyone there identifies as on the spectrum. So, it was just, I don't know, it was incredibly rewarding at the end of that process to be able to, include people that otherwise would not have been included at that point,
Yeah, for sure. So the three leads you cast are Rick Glassman, Sue-Ann Can, and Albert Rutecki. So how did you guys land on the three of them, and what made them the right ones for Jack, Vivian, and Harrison?
Well, interestingly enough, Sue-Ann and Rick came in on day 2. They both were represented. Rick had only recently, only a couple of years before, actually gotten his diagnosis and said that for the first time, his life made sense to him. But he was a working actor prior to that. Sue-Ann had started in modeling and had done some jobs and was represented. So the people that, that were represented by agents were in that first wave of people we saw as we were taking the time to reach out to other, more remote areas and getting people to self-tape and whatnot. That took a little bit longer to get those in. But from that day, it was such a relief to see how talented these people were. I mean, they just came in and owned their parts from the very first day. And we had people that gave them a run for their money, but in my mind, the bar was set from the minute they both auditioned for those roles. Similarly, Albert self-taped in Pennsylvania. And my daughter at the time was my casting assistant, and she saw his tape first and came flying in the office going, you have to see this, you have to see this. And it was just so Harrison. It was just, there was just no question. So we did have people that we mixed and matched. We put different groups together when we were testing that could have gone very different ways, but there was just something about that chemistry between the three of them that just really felt so right for those roles, particularly. And it just, I really don't know how, normally that process is so stressful and you're just, plowing through trying to cover as much ground as you can and make sure you found the right people for every role. And this was the opposite. It was joy every day. I just don't know how
They
to
really do
describe
feel like they've known each other for like decades, and they've been living together for a while.
You really do.
Yeah.
Well,
But
and
the other
we did.
part is like
sorry.
they're also, all three of them are like really good at comedy too. And that's such an important element of the show, because you're laughing like with them, like not at their expense. And I feel like a lot of times when autism is like portrayed in media, there is like a seriousness to it, or like a heavy-handedness. And I thought like the comedy that they bring to it was so important. So was that something you guys were keying in on too?
Absolutely. And there's always that element in what Jason writes. And, he kind of effortlessly goes back and forth between poignant and dramatic and funny and just real life. And that part of what was interesting about that is they did actually really click, even from the day we did the test, where they just felt like they were roommates, that they already knew each other. And we then shot that pilot, and it was over a year because of COVID before they all came back and we could do the series. And from the very first Zoom table read, which, felt so awkward, but immediately, not just the three leads who are on the spectrum, but our other cast members as well, they're just a family. And you could feel it immediately, the way they were, catching up with each other and asking. They really had gotten to know each other in the course of that pilot. And there's a comfort level between them that is really hard to fake. They just, it was one of the kindest and loveliest sets ever, which again comes from Jason. He's an incredibly warm person. It kind of always starts at the top and he sets a tone, but you never know when you bring a group of strangers together what that dynamic is going to be. And the dynamic from day one of this group was so supportive. When we sat together on the pilot for the first time to do a table read, everyone was crying and laughing and, just overwhelmed, discovering each other in their roles. And yeah, it's hard to not be as effusive as possible about it. It just was
this is what
such a different kind of experience.
I mean, that sounds awesome. And like, I'd be remiss not to mention their support system. The actors who play their supports, Sosie Bacon, Chris Pang, and Joe Mantegna, who also has a daughter on the spectrum in real life. So can you talk quickly about casting them? Because they, like you were saying, they fit so perfectly into that world too, as well.
It's really interesting that when I was reading, I had read for a while for Sosie's role, and people were very good, but I wasn't quite able to put my finger on what it was that was missing, as this person who's supposed to be their guide, and helping keep them focused and all of that. There always was this sort of distance between the actor reading that part and the people that they were talking to. And Sosie naturally is such a loving person, she can't not be, and it just comes through. So her approach to that character then was someone who saw them as peers and in no way was trying to either talk down to them or tell them what they should be doing, but just trying to be that person guiding them and reminding them and of what their goals were. And it came from such a genuine and loving place that you instantly understood why she would choose to be there. And it just made all the difference. And similarly with Chris Pang, he self-taped from Australia in a vacuum, not having any idea who was playing his sister. And that role, the challenge of that role is that this is someone who is having to be the parent for their sibling and be responsible for their sibling, and is also trying to have his own life. And it's a lot of responsibility, and you feel it, you know that it's coming from his concern for her. There are also times where it's overwhelming, and it's very hard to not come across when the frustration comes out. It's easy for that to come out as just real frustration and not coming from a loving place. And once again, he did it, and you could just feel from the get-go how much he loved his sister. He just was not equipped to handle this responsibility, and it was beautiful. And it just, sometimes you don't know until you see it what actually makes something work. And that was sort of how it was with both Sosie and Chris. The minute you looked at those auditions, it was like, okay, now we have it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Cami, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your
Thank you.
time, and we'll see you back here in a little bit.
My pleasure.